So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Jeffrey Martin of Sphericam.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here with all of you today. I'm here to talk about our new camera and a few other things. First, I'll just get right down to business and tell you about our new camera. So we've designed, we've made a revision of our current device, and we've designed it specifically with Google Street View in mind. It has 6 high-end Sony sensors. It can do up to 6K video, and it can do up to 12K photos at 5 frames per second. In RAW, so you have great freedom for color grading and processing. It's got a lot of storage on board, up to 1.5 terabytes. It's got a high-capacity battery. It's packed with sensors, IMU, GPS. It's got 6 microphones that will allow directional audio. And it's packed with a lot of processing power, including 2 FPGAs and 4 CPUs. In other words, it's ready for intelligence. And we're keeping it in a small package under 75 millimeter optical radius. It can be used handheld, it can be used mounted on a car or a bicycle or any other vehicle. So we've made the design to be a good combination of the organic and the mechanical. So we were inspired by a structure like this, which is actually a virus. We're not calling it the virus, though. We're calling it something else. Don't worry. And I'll show you what the actual camera looks like a little bit later. So what does this all mean, really? Are we just here every year? We're announcing new cameras. It's bigger. It's more megapixels, and so on and so on. Are we just, headed for this? Well, I don't think so. I think things are starting to get interesting in certain fundamental ways, and that's what I would like to talk about today by talking a little bit about the history and the future of photography and computing. So first, let's go back to this guy, who is actually really, really interesting. The photographer who built this camera is called George Lawrence. Does anyone know who George Lawrence is? No? Okay, he's like total badass of the world of photography, really. He's amazing. So this camera was built specifically to photograph a train. This was over 100 years ago. This was in around 1903. And George Lawrence's motto was, "The hitherto impossible in photography is our specialty," which I think is great. That's what we still do. All these cameras, these futuristic devices we're building, this is still what we do. So this guy's close to my heart. George Lawrence specialized in aerial photography, and the first cameras that he built for aerial photography were suspended from balloons, and he rode under these balloons with the camera, but he suffered a terrible accident, and he fell 60 meters when the balloon separated from the platform. He fell 60 meters to the ground. 60 meters is as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa or the Arc de Triomphe, which this unfortunate gentleman is falling off of. George Lawrence broke his fall with some telephone wires and survived. I don't quite know how, it's pretty high. And he said, okay, well, it's time to reassess things. And he started building new devices for aerial photography. This was the actual camera that he used. And as you can see, it's a panoramic camera. It's a scanning panoramic camera. He was shooting 180-degree panoramas. This camera used negatives that were 20 by 42 inches. So these are gigantic photos, like gigapixel resolution. This was 100 years ago. This guy is amazing. You can see on the right, he's, here you can see him just about to launch the camera. So this device was suspended from 17 kites, which were then pulling up a stabilizing mechanism, which then held the camera below it. You can see here, it's being launched from a ship. He was talking to the Navy quite a lot, who were interested in this application for certain photography applications for wartime reconnaissance. And here's the man himself, looking kind of like a wizard, I think. surrounded by his assistants and a friendly policeman. So his photographs were stunning. This is the one that he's most famous for. This is San Francisco, in the aftermath of the earthquake after the city had burned down. And I think it's just absolutely stunning. Here's one of New York City. Here is the ironworks in Akron, Ohio. Here's a balloon festival in Chicago. So I'm going to move forward now a few decades to the first digital camera that was ever made. So this is called the Chromemco Cyclops. This was built in 1974, 1975. It made images that were 32 by 32 pixels. It was quite a breakthrough. It made the cover of Popular Electronics, where you can build your own, as you can see. And this was a fundamentally new thing. This was not just pixels instead of silver grains on paper, but it allowed actually integrating an imaging device with a computing device, and this was a big leap forward. So can we roll the video, please? So sorry, if you can turn down the volume. So here we have a ball going through a maze, controlled entirely by computers. So the ball was colored black to allow higher visibility. The Chromemco Cyclops was above the maze, tracked by two stepper motors. It had to follow the ball because it was like looking through a straw, basically, with 32 by 32 pixels. And there were two other computers, one controlling the stepping motors to move the camera around, and another to control the tilting of the maze. And this was 35 years ago. This was the absolute state-of-the-art of machine vision. So I'm going to move on to another interesting milestone in the history of photography. Stop the video, please. This is the first ever webcam. It's called the Trojan Room Coffee Pot. You can read about it, of course, on Wikipedia. So this was the image. It's a bit small, isn't it? I'll enlarge it for you there. So basically, it was a picture of a coffee pot, and it was located in Cambridge University Engineering building. And it was born out of laziness, which is where a lot of the great inventions of the world have come from, of course. So basically, it was a bunch of engineers who didn't want to walk down the hall to get a cup of coffee, only to realize that there was no coffee in the coffee machine. So they put a camera there, and then they could see whether there's coffee there or not, and they could save themselves the great effort of getting up and going down the hall. This was in 1991, and this webcam became quite famous. It was available online for 10 years. Until it was taken down because the engineering department moved buildings. A few years later, we started to get the first, real digital cameras. This was the first digital camera that I ever got. Did anyone else have this camera up there? Yeah, a couple. So these were interesting, but they were fundamentally not really in the history of what I'm talking about here. Not that interesting. It was sort of just normal camera with computer chips inside. I know it's more difficult than that, but it wasn't taking into account, the way the world is changing. It was more like, the internet in 1998, where we were thinking like, this is going to be big, but we don't really know how or what it's really going to be like, and it was still a little bit hard for people to understand. What really started to change things was the availability of things like this, camera modules, miniaturized camera modules that were tiny and cheap, and started to allow us to embed cameras into anything, to allow integration of visual sensing devices and kind of into any object. So this is where I feel that the world is fundamentally changing with the advent of these kinds of things. We're not really at this point yet, but we're starting to, get to, stuff like this and stuff like this, where, we're having robots sensing things, and we're starting to get to things like this, where we have, devices that are moving around in our world and sensing the world around us and helping us. We're starting to see emergent properties with photography and computing. Briefly, emergent properties are sort of complex systems that arise from simple things. So in computing, you've got things like reliability, security, things like that. There are emergent properties of water, for example, like surface tension and expansion when freezing that make life possible. There are emergent properties in the animal kingdom. These are the starlings in Rome, which are following simple rules. They're staying close to their neighbor, they're staying away from predators, but they're doing very strange things that we don't understand at all. They're making these amazing shapes in the sky. If you've seen the BBC Planet Earth 2, there's a segment on them that's really beautiful. And what we're coming to today that I find the most exciting is the advent of convolutional neural networks, which I'm not going to fully explain today. That would take a long time, but basically it involves training software to analyze images, usually in small pieces at a time, over and over again, using very, very large data sets that eventually allows us to have software that can recognize complex images, very, very complex things, and to say whether an image is a picture of an elephant or a teapot or a person or what kind of face it is. And it's starting to allow us to have things, extremely complex systems such as autonomous cars and so on. One of the most fascinating and strange examples I've seen of image recognition and convolutional neural networks is Deep Dreaming with Bob Ross. If you could roll the video, please. If you could turn down the volume. So basically we've got an image recognition algorithm trained to recognize things that aren't actually there, and then to put those objects there, and then sort of it's feeding into itself over and over. And then it's eventually creating images that are just completely not there at all, but exaggerated to such a great degree that you get something that is just so absolutely strange. It is beyond words. I didn't put anything in your coffee, I promise. So now we're at a kind of tipping point, I think, in the history of computing and photography with all of these factors, and we're here today with new tools that are going to start changing the world in ways that we maybe haven't quite imagined. And the future is always hard to imagine, and we're building it as best we can, but some of these emerging technologies are going to give us a future that is a little bit unexpected, and it's partly up to us to build this hardware and software for creating this future. I'll show you now our new camera and what it actually looks like. If you could roll the video, please. So it's this is the first time we're showing this ever. It will be available later this year. And just to go through a couple of the specifications again, it's allowing very high resolution capture, up to 5 frames per second in 60 megapixels and RAW. And we're very, very excited to tell you more about it. Please stop by our table later. Thank you very much.
I was expecting more time on the Sphericam, but I'm actually really thankful that we got that history lesson. So I think we owe it to Jeff to go visit his booth later and learn more about the new camera. Thank you, Jeff.